The question of what is right and what is wrong is one of the oldest and most fundamental inquiries of human existence. It's a question that honestly, every person and every society must confront. Do we all share a common moral compass, an innate understanding of good and bad that transcends our specific circumstances? Or are our ethical beliefs shaped entirely by the culture we are born into, making them as varied as the languages we speak and the foods we eat? This fundamental tension between a single, universal morality and many culturally specific ones lies at the heart of how we understand ourselves, our neighbors, and our shared world. It really challenges us to think deeply about the foundations of our own values and how we should engage with those who hold different beliefs. This debate isn't just some abstract philosophical exercise. It has profound and practical implications for our daily lives and, honestly, for global relations. When we encounter customs that seem strange or even morally troubling, we are forced to decide whether we should judge them by our own standards or try to understand them from within their own cultural context. The answer we choose affects international law, human rights advocacy, and even personal relationships. Are there certain actions, like causing needless suffering, that are always wrong everywhere? Or can context and cultural tradition justify practices that others find abhorrent? Exploring this question helps us navigate a complex and interconnected world with greater wisdom and compassion. The journey into this debate requires us to be both critical and empathetic. We must be willing to examine the origins of our own moral intuitions, questioning whether they are truly universal or simply inherited from our community. At the same time, we must approach other cultures with a genuine desire to understand their perspectives, rather than dismissing them outright. This process of inquiry can be uncomfortable, as it forces us to confront the possibility that our most deeply held beliefs are not the only valid ones. However, it is through this very process that we can cultivate a more sophisticated and humane ethical outlook, one that is capable of addressing the complex challenges of our time. Ultimately, the discussion about universal ethics versus cultural relativism asks us to consider what it means to be human. Does our shared humanity imply a shared set of core moral duties and rights? Or does our capacity for creating diverse cultures mean that morality itself is a creative act, with no single correct form? As we explore these two powerful viewpoints, we begin to see that the answer may not be a simple choice between one and the other. Instead, we may find that a meaningful ethical life requires us to hold both the idea of a common humanity and the reality of cultural difference in a delicate and thoughtful balance, constantly seeking understanding across divides. The idea that some ethical principles are universal is a powerful and enduring one. This view, often called moral universalism, suggests that certain truths about right and wrong apply to all people in all places and at all times. Proponents of this idea believe that morality is not just a matter of opinion or tradition, but is grounded in something more fundamental, such as human reason, shared biology, or a common human nature. For example, almost every major religion and philosophical system in the world has some version of the Golden Rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This principle's widespread presence suggests a deep-seated shared intuition about the importance of empathy and reciprocity in human interactions. Another powerful example of universal ethics can be found in the modern concept of human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations, was founded on the belief that every person is born with certain inalienable rights, such as the right to life, liberty, and security. This framework was created with the explicit goal of setting a common standard for all nations, asserting that these rights are not granted by any state or culture, but belong to individuals simply because they are human. Thinkers who support this view argue that these rights protect the essential dignity and capabilities that allow a person to live a flourishing life, and therefore they must be defended universally, regardless of local customs or laws. The argument for universal truths also draws strength from our shared biology and emotional responses. As human beings, we all have the capacity to feel pain, joy, love, and loss. We instinctively recoil from cruelty and are moved by acts of kindness. These basic emotional and physical experiences create a common ground for our moral lives. When we see a child crying in distress, our impulse to help is not something we learn from a specific cultural handbook. It is a fundamental human reaction. This shared vulnerability and capacity for empathy suggests that at least some of our moral duties, like the duty to prevent unnecessary suffering, are rooted in the very fabric of our being as a species. From this perspective, certain actions are considered wrong, not because a particular society says so, but because they fundamentally violate what it means to be human. For instance, the practice of torture is condemned globally because it is an assault on a person's basic dignity and physical integrity. Similarly, the act of enslaving another person is seen as inherently wrong because it denies their autonomy and fundamental worth. The universalist position holds that while cultures may have different customs and traditions, these core moral prohibitions form a foundation upon which all just societies must be built. They are seen as the non-negotiable principles that protect our shared humanity from the potential excesses of cultural difference. In stark contrast to the idea of universal truths stands cultural relativism. This viewpoint argues that morality is not universal, but is instead a product of culture. According to this perspective, what is considered right in one society may be considered wrong in another, and there is no independent, external standard by which to judge these differing moral codes. Each culture's ethics are seen as valid within their own context. This idea encourages us to suspend judgment and try to understand why a particular practice makes sense to the people who follow it. It reminds us that our own moral standards are also shaped by our upbringing, and what seems natural to us might appear strange to someone from a different background. We can see examples of this moral diversity in many aspects of daily life across the globe. Consider rules about food and dress. In some cultures, eating certain animals like cows or pigs is a grave moral transgression, while in others, it is a perfectly acceptable part of their diet. Similarly, standards of modest clothing vary dramatically from one place to another. What is considered appropriate attire in a Western city might be seen as deeply disrespectful in a more traditional society. These are not just matters of taste, they are often tied to deeply held beliefs about purity, respect, and social order. Cultural relativism suggests we cannot say one way is inherently better than the other, they are simply different. The differences extend to more complex social structures, such as family and community obligations. In many individualistic Western societies, the primary duty is to oneself and one's immediate nuclear family. However, in many other cultures around the world, the collective, be it the extended family, the clan, or the village, is paramount. In these societies, decisions about one's career, marriage, or finances are made with the well-being of the group as the primary consideration. An action that might be praised as independent and self-reliant in one culture could be condemned as selfish and irresponsible in another, highlighting how deeply moral values can be tied to social organization. This perspective becomes most challenging when we encounter practices that deeply conflict with our own moral convictions, such as honor killings or female genital mutilation. A strict cultural relativist might argue that we, as outsiders, have no right to condemn these practices because they are embedded in a culture's traditions and values. They would urge us to understand the social logic behind them, even if we find them abhorrent. This is where cultural relativism faces its greatest criticism. While it promotes tolerance and understanding, it can also lead to a difficult conclusion that there is no basis for condemning actions that seem to cause extreme harm as long as they are culturally sanctioned. The intense debate between universal ethics and cultural relativism suggests that neither position, in its extreme form, may be fully adequate for navigating our complex world. Perhaps the most constructive path forward lies in a middle ground, one that acknowledges both our shared humanity and our rich cultural diversity. This approach would recognize that there are core principles, such as preventing cruelty and promoting basic well-being, that can serve as a universal foundation. At the same time, it would respect that these core principles can be expressed and prioritized in many different ways across various cultures. This balanced view allows for both cross-cultural criticism of harmful practices and a deep respect for local traditions. The forces of globalization and the rise of the internet are dramatically shaping this conversation. Today, we are more connected than ever before. We can learn about distant cultures, witness injustices happening thousands of miles away, and engage in dialogue with people from completely different backgrounds in an instant. This unprecedented connectivity breaks down isolation and forces a kind of global moral conversation. When a whistleblower like Edward Snowden reveals government secrets, The debate about security versus privacy is not confined to one nation. It becomes a worldwide discussion. This exposure to diverse viewpoints can challenge our own assumptions and foster a more global ethical consciousness. This interconnectedness creates both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, it can promote greater understanding and empathy, as people share their stories and discover common values across cultural divides. Global movements for climate change or gender equality are powerful examples of people uniting behind a shared ethical vision. On the other hand, this same connectivity can also lead to conflict, as different value systems clash more directly. The key is to foster a culture of respectful dialogue, where we listen to understand rather than to win an argument. This kind of conversation is essential for finding common ground without erasing important cultural differences. In the end, the task of building a just and humane world requires a continuous effort to balance the universal and the particular. We must hold firm to the idea that every individual possesses a fundamental dignity that must be protected, which gives us a basis for condemning egregious harms wherever they occur. However, we must also approach the world with humility, recognizing that our own culture does not have a monopoly on moral wisdom. By engaging in open dialogue, listening with empathy, and seeking to understand the values that animate others, we can slowly build a shared ethical framework. This framework will be one that respects our common humanity while celebrating the many beautiful and diverse ways of living a meaningful life.